Thank you. My name is Chris Michel. I am Bloomberg's head of diversity and inclusion for our Americas region. And I'm here with an esteemed panel today to talk about inclusivity and inclusivity in your team strategy moving forward. So with us today, we have Deanna Mulligan, who is the chair of the board for Guardian Life Insurance. She's also the author of the book Higher Purpose: How Smart Companies Can Close the Skills Gap. We have Adia Harvey Wingfield, who's a professor of sociology at Washington University in St. Louis, and Dominic Price, who's a resident work futurist at Atlassian. Now, Dominic, I have to ask you, resident work futurist. Tell me about what that is.
I'll be honest, as we're amongst friends and very intelligent people here, it is the best made-up job ever. I'm surrounded by people with real jobs, and I've got a made-up job. We created it because our mission's all about unleashing the potential in every team. And we're like, you know what? We need to understand the future of teamwork in terms of skills and diversity and inclusion and people, and then how to be more human in work and what the impact of technology in place. And so for the last 4 years, I've been fascinated in dreaming and exploring the future of work and helping us navigate there every single day.
Excellent, excellent. So that takes us right into our conversation around inclusivity in the future of work. And so one of the things we've talked a great deal about, especially in my part of the world around D&I, since May, we've had a lot of companies come out with definitive statements of support around diversity and inclusion, generally, and more specifically for Black Lives Matter. Other companies, actually Guardian in particular, have taken action to sign on to the CEO pledge for diversity and inclusion. These public statements are a good step, and they're demonstrative of commitment. But I guess the question is, what should companies actually be doing to live up to those statements? In other words, how do we walk the talk? So, Deanna, let me start with you on that one, and then maybe we'll go around.
Well, thank you, Chris. Guardian was happy to sign on to the CEO inclusion and diversity statement, but actually, we've been practicing inclusion and diversity for many years at Guardian. And a couple of things I'd like to highlight that we have done most recently. One of those is to set up listening sessions with our executive team and diverse team members throughout the organization. So I think the current Zoom, Skype environment makes it much easier to take frontline team members, for example, and bring them into a meeting of the senior executive team and just listen. So listening to people at all levels is one idea. A second thing I think companies need to do is not just ensure people have a seat at the table. Everybody talks about ensuring people have a seat at the table, but they also need to ensure that once they get to the table, they have a voice and they talk. And we need to get people at the table talking and everyone listening, because I think there are lots of good ideas out there that CEOs need to listen to. And then finally, we need to celebrate accomplishments and celebrate wins. It's important that everyone knows when things go well and things go right. And I think that's going to motivate everyone to continue to explore and be innovative and find new ways to make people not only feel included, but to make their inclusion part of the overall success of the company.
Professor, what would you say to that?
Well, I think those are great statements, and they are supported by a lot of the research in this area that talks about ways that companies and organizations can address these issues. I think the only things that I would add to elaborate a bit on what was just said is that research also indicates that when we are focusing on the challenges that may be present for workers of color and Black workers in particular, it's important not to paint with too broad a brush and assume that Black workers' experiences are universalized or necessarily commonly shared. One of the things that I've learned from my own research is that where Black workers are situated in the organizational hierarchy makes a very big difference in terms of the types of racial experiences that they encounter in workplaces. So I think it's really useful for organizations to be attuned to how, even among their Black workers, those experiences may vary depending on where those workers are employed and in what kinds of jobs those workers are employed. So I would emphasize the importance of focusing on that. I would also just emphasize the importance of making sure that managers are brought in, particularly mid-level managers, to creating solutions to these types of issues. Other research has indicated that often managers can be left out of these types of strategies, and that when they are too top down, it doesn't necessarily address the types of solutions that are useful at middle levels for acknowledging the challenges that workers are facing across the board. And it's important to make sure, again, that even if we're focusing on mid-level managers, we're not excluding workers who are in various tiers of the organization itself.
It's a great point that you bring up, just to stay there for a second. One of the things when we talk a lot about inclusion efforts, they often tend to stall at the middle management level. And so in your work, how have you thought about engaging middle managers in this conversation when, middle managers are thinking, I've got to make widgets, basically. I'm not concerned about necessarily who's making it. I just got to get them made. How do you engage middle managers in that conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it helps for middle managers to be able to see and understand how being more attuned to these broader issues and having more racial diversity in an organization ultimately benefits the organization and those workers at large, right? And I think that when managers are able to see that not having more racial diversity does not really work to your benefit, you don't get the same variety of ideas and viewpoints and perspectives, and ways that those viewpoints and ideas and perspectives are influenced by racial background and other aspects of people's experiences, mean that organizations may be lacking and frequently are lacking in terms of the different viewpoints and talents and perspectives that they can bring to a table that can help adequately solve pressing and challenging problems. So whether we're talking about people who are creating widgets, as you put it, or people who are in the healthcare industry, or people who are in other fields, it helps, I think, for organizations and for managers to know that this is something that benefits them and the organization at large. But it also is really useful to know that there are ways that they can be part of the solution, rather than simply giving instructions to be more attuned to diversity without clear, specific guidance about what that looks like. When managers are brought into ways that they can readjust hiring, ways that they can think about the culture in the departments or areas where they manage, where they can think about mentoring programs and how those can reach everybody, the data indicate that these are concrete strategies that really are able to move the needle.
And Dom, as you think about the future workplace, have you had to deal with that at all? Those questions of, integrating these statements that everybody has embraced, but how they're going to walk that talk?
Yeah, it's a great point that I particularly like what you're saying there, Adia, around how do you actually have to do it, right? It's actually very easy to put it on a poster or on a website, but how do you follow through? How do you connect with those middle managers and people around? One of the things that we've sort of stated, if you spend $1 on diversity, you need to spend $2 on inclusion, right? Because you don't get one without the other. You have to do the follow through. But also, I think we have to acknowledge that you have a choice. And I think a lot of leaders are actually making the choice that we prefer they didn't make in some companies, because if you have a homogenous team, you will go fast. You won't be innovative, as Adia just pointed out. You'll be creative, right? You're not going to inspire your customers. You're not going to have that rich tapestry of customs and backgrounds and experience. But it's a decision that as a leader you get to make. I think leaders should make the right decision and hire from a diverse talent pool and build a place of inclusion where people feel the safety to do the best work of their lives. And we encourage our people to do that. One of the things that we've done a little bit differently, instead of measuring diversity and inclusion at the organizational level, which we still do, we've actually started to measure it at the team level. So instead of saying, it feels all right at an aggregate, but actually, if you take gender, for example, you've got sort of all the females in one part of the organization, all the males in the other. That's not diversity, right? And so how do we do it at a team level? And how do we help teams not only assess that, but correct it? And so turning that into action has been something we've been focusing on. I think there's upside in the current future of work we're experiencing. There's lots of bad things about COVID and the pandemic, but if you think about work from home and flexibility, it gives us access to a way more diverse talent pool in terms of caregivers, the disabled, a whole of people that physically can't get into an office, where if we use these kind of mediums, you can get these people that have amazing hearts and amazing minds and give them access to meaningful work. And the contribution they give is as good, if not better, than anyone else. So I think there's a whole lot of upside if we could tap into flexibility as well.
And sorry, go ahead. Were you going to say something, Deanna?
I was just going to say, I agree with what Dom is saying, and we have seen that remote work promotes flexibility, which helps promote inclusion and diversity. It gives us an opportunity to hire from lots of different locations, which is also important. And then the final thing is our training and our evaluation of managers includes the model that a good manager manages a diverse team and uses that tapestry of experience Don and Adia were speaking of to produce results. So I agree with what Don was saying, that you should be measuring diversity at all levels, and we actually look at it at the leader level or the managerial level.
And both of you in your answers just now just mentioned hiring, and so I wanted to zone in on that a little bit. So recently there was a large bank CEO here in the United States that got in some trouble for suggesting that Black talent is almost impossible to find. Those of us who work in D&I know this is not true. Rather, what's true is that hiring managers are often more comfortable going with what they know, some sort of finding their usual suspects. So as a leader, how do you convince your hiring managers, the people below you, to think outside of the box or to look in places with which they aren't familiar for their talent? Why don't we start, Deanna, with you on that one?
Well, we actually started a program a few years ago. I started it with my executive team and HR, and we cascaded it down, where we asked people to put into a database people they know who could refer us to diverse candidates. It's not enough to use the recruiting firms. It's a starting, a baseline to say the recruiting firms, we want a diverse candidate pool when you're hiring. But we also went beyond that and said, we want you to contribute the names of your friends, your professional associates who can refer us on to the diverse pool, because sometimes the recruiters don't reach them. And then HR actually used that database, and we found some incredible diverse people who wouldn't have come to our attention otherwise, who are now in our organization and we think are going to make a tremendous contribution. So I personally pushed hard and called on members of my team and said, you have to put names in this database. They may not be people who are available to hire, but they can lead us to people who are available. That's just one example, something we've done.
Yeah. Dom or Adia?
Yeah, I want to point. Yeah. Oh, are we both? Oh, thank you.
No, go ahead, Adia.
I just want to make sure that what Deanna is saying is so important, and I think it echoes one of the key things that comes out of the research on this, which is that proactivity is absolutely essential. And one of the areas where the data show that many managers go wrong is either they sit back and wait for candidates to come to them, or they rely on these questions of these networks and these relationships and these existing ties that they already have. And both of these strategies are ones that fail. They fail time after time after time, and they fail consistently, because ultimately what the data show us is that frequently people are networked and in relationships and connected to people who share their background, or with whom they share similar cultural cues, or whom they already know from existing educational experiences or what have them. This is an incredibly useless strategy for building a more racially diverse client pool and a more racially diverse employment pool. Data indicate that organizations have to, one, take intentional steps to make sure that they are not simply going with what's familiar and what's comfortable and with the people who are already like them, but they have to take this step of reaching out to networks, professional organizations, academic universities, institutions of higher learning, places that may be a little bit outside of their beaten path, but this is how they turn up candidates that come from different backgrounds and places that are different from them. I have some personal experience with this in my own department at Washington University. We are one of the most racially diverse departments, I think, in sociology and certainly on our campus, in part because this was one of the strategies that we took, that we made sure that we reached out to people who were coming from different backgrounds and people who were immersed in various professional networks. And the end result of this is that it's yielded a department where about half of the faculty are people of color, and importantly, about half of the full professors, people who have reached the highest rank in the professoriate, are also people of color. And that's not something that you see every day, but it's also not something that happens by accident. This happened because we made an intentional effort to make sure that this was what our department looked like.
Yeah. Dom, any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I just love the use of the word there, intent. Like this happens because you do it on purpose. It doesn't happen well by accident. I mean, you might be lucky, but it doesn't happen well by accident. And I think one of the things that we need to be really conscious of, again, for leaders out there thinking about this is, it's very easy to talk about diversity and inclusion, but you actually have to follow through. People are going to recognize you and reward you for following through. And I think what both speakers have just shared there is role modeling, right? It's not asking someone else to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. And the minute you role model that behavior, you'll be amazed how many people sort of mimic and copy. One of the things we've added into our interview process is asking people what the diversity is like, where they're coming from. And it's not that they're going to copy, cut, and paste that, but you can learn a lot about someone from their success. And when they tell stories of team success in the environments they've been in, you want to understand, are they the kind of person that's going to invest and say, I'm playing the long game here. I want to get this rich tapestry of talent together, even though I know that we're going to argue and we're going to disagree and it's going to feel harder. That's what collaboration is, right? Collaboration is respectful dissent. It's not consensus. It's not violent agreement. It's quite different. And so when you get those different backgrounds, you want that rich discussion, but we know that takes longer, but we also know it's more valuable. So how do I make sure people are willing to invest in that and play the long game and get a better result for the team and for their customers, rather than play the short game, which is if I hire a whole lot of people like me, we'll get on really well, it'll be really quick, it's not going to be effective. And so I think one of the measures of success for us has to change from raw productivity, which is what we tend to over-focus on, to actual team effectiveness. What does it mean to belong in a team and have team cohesion, which is an area we've been focusing on internally and with our customers.
And that's a great segue to this next question. You know, we've been in this remote environment now for 7 months, maybe going on 8 months, since mid-March. A lot of organizations have said already that they're committed to remote work at least through the end of the year, if not longer. Collaboration is this word that many organizations use. But the question, I think, is how do you build that collaboration? How do you collaborate? How do you have camaraderie when people can't physically be together, when we have to work in this two-dimensional environment? How do you build that cohesion? Dom, you started talking about it a little bit, so why don't we stay there with you on that one?
I think the first thing we have to accept is we have to unlearn the habits of the past, because we can't go back. We can't hit rewind. We can't go back before March. And however much we miss the water cooler or the in-person meetings, like, we can't do them right now. So once you get over that, we're then going to go, cool, we're in a constraint-based environment. It's when we're our most innovative, when we're constrained. And so what can we do? You know, some of the upsides, we did some research recently. We did a survey of 5,000 people across the globe. You look at the upside of some of this environment, this medium. So women spoke highly about how they'd seen the removal of the status game in work, and they felt more liberated in their work. I'm like, cool, that's an awesome upside to this environment. There's so many people are like, oh, the idea of the construct of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday didn't work for me. But now I've got flexibility. I feel like I can contribute more meaningfully to work and my family and society. And so what we can actually do is we can build ways of working now that are agnostic to where you work and really focus on how you connect. One of the things I've been practicing, which is nothing to do with technology, and it's completely free of charge, is closing the big thing on the front of my face and opening the two big things on the side, right? And listening more. Because when I'm in a workshop, I tend to be the tall guy that grabs the pen and gets on the whiteboard, and I don't hear what I don't hear from the people that don't speak. But in this medium, it's a lot easier for me to go, actually, I'm going to pause and listen to other people and actively consume that, like genuinely hear it. So I think this medium can be a huge leveler for us because it's ultimate equality, right? We're all on a very similar internet connection. Doesn't matter where we are in the world or our background, we can all contribute. So I think the more we realize that collaboration is about bringing ideas, but also listening and being wrong, and I think the better we can all become. And then we can also roll that out in a hybrid environment when we have some people back in an office and some people working from home and some people working from a co-working space.
We have done what I might call scheduling spontaneity. So we don't have the water cooler anymore, but you can schedule a 15-minute coffee break with somebody. Zoom coffee, we do all the time. We do after work parties. We do things that are specifically fun, like having a bake-off or a costume contest. Or at one point we had a tour my space. So different people at different levels of the organization gave a video tour of their working space, like a welcome to my office. So I absolutely agree with Dom that we can't use this as an excuse. This is what we are, and I believe we can make it work.
Adia?
Yes, I would just add that while certainly it's critically important during this time when we're all, or many of us are working from home and not seeing people as often as possible, I will say that this is one area that does concern me when it comes to these issues related to diversity, largely because a lot of research indicates that for many workers of color, again, particularly Black workers, they often are more likely to feel isolated, marginalized, and disconnected from the environments where they are employed. So I worry that when we are in these spaces where we are less likely to be in an office and less likely to have those spontaneous interactions and less likely to be around other people, there may be ways that that isolation becomes magnified for Black workers and for workers of color. I think this is something that organizations particularly want to be attuned to and want to be cognizant of as they are thinking about how to take their environments, how to take their workplaces forward under the current environment. We know that a lot of research does indicate that having more flexibility and working from home can be very productive for many workers in terms of giving them more opportunities to schedule their workloads and their days in ways that are better suited for them and their particular needs. But I think organizations also want to be mindful of the fact that we don't want to prioritize that scheduling and those opportunities at the expense of workers of color who may frequently be left out of informal or formal opportunities for networking and relationship building.
Yeah. Just to build on that,
I think that brings up good. Yeah.
There's also the social aspect, which is when you see someone around the office, you're like, hey, Deanna, you don't seem yourself right now. Like, is everything okay? You get those social interactions, which you don't get in this context. So I think there is that fear of out of sight, out of mind. And we don't want to create a two-tier system, which I think if we do it by accident, we'll inadvertently create a two-tier system. And I think we want to create one of more inclusivity. So I love that point.
Yeah. And just building on employee resource. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say we have an employee resource group, as many companies do, for people of color, and we have a lot of allies within that group as well, and they have very frequent meetings and social events, and they also visit the executive team. So the executive team invites them once a week to come and talk about the goals that we've set and to report on the progress, because we want to make sure the executive team doesn't lose sight of the goals that we have, but it also gives the people in the employee resource group an opportunity to come before the executive team and then, offline to have social interaction as well.
And this is, I think, a great point, right? There are some very specific adverse impacts on diversity in this remote environment. We have young people who are living alone right now. We have women who are traditionally shouldering the greater burden of childcare, unfortunately. Working parents, two-parent working families. We talked a little bit already about the people of color who miss out on that organic development that already when they're in the physical environment, it's going to be even harder for them in this virtual environment. So how do we meet the needs of all of these constituents and the organization in these remote work environments? Deanna, why don't we start with you on that?
Well, in terms of people who bear the primary responsibility for childcare or elder care or schooling, we actually have enhanced our benefits this year, and we added 2 extra weeks to paid time off that employees can take paid basically for any reason that applies to their situation. We also, of course, give them unpaid time off through the Family Medical Leave Act. And we created a fund where they could apply to be reimbursed for some of that time if they needed to go beyond our generous paid time. We also created Quiet Fridays, where we said we're going to have Fridays where we don't have meetings so that people can clean off their desks, maybe attend to some family needs during the day if they need to, and finish their work at night. We had a floating mental health day this summer and just said, take one day off as a mental health day. So there are things you can do to help relieve that burden. Another thing that we did is we arranged for backup emergency child care and elder care, and we've always had that. But we've seen over the summer that usage of that benefit went up by 25%. So it does matter what corporations do and what benefits they offer.
Yeah. Adia, any thoughts on that, including all of these constituents?
Yeah, I think that I want to echo a specific point Deanna just made, which is the importance of organizations doing what they can to support workers. I think that's so critical and so necessary. And one of the things that I hope will be one of the bright spots to come out of this pandemic is ideally that many organizations will realize that the changes that they are making now to adapt to these unforeseen but very upsetting circumstances are ones that perhaps should have or could have been made a while ago, or things that they keep in place going forward. I would expect, again, and this is based on what a lot of the research says, but I would anticipate that many workers will find that these types of changes, if organizations are making changes like what Deanna has described, I expect that many workers will find these to be ones that really facilitate and aid in their ability to do their jobs better under these adverse circumstances. But I think that they're also going to think that these are changes that they want to keep in place because these will help to continue to do their jobs and perform their work more successfully once, knock on wood, we're in a better place with this whole situation and we go back to some right we go back to some version of normal. So I really would like to see organizations making shifts to make these kinds of changes more permanent. The only things that I would suggest are that, again, I think it's really important for organizations to think about how having racially diverse employees mean that you want to take into consideration what various constituencies in your organization will be impacting. And I think we also want to think about how the types of policies that are being put in place from organizations might be expanded more broadly, right? So that if I'm not fortunate enough to work at Deanna's company, but I work at a different place, how can we expand these ideas and these benefits so that workers at large are able to take advantage of and benefit these? It should not just be that I have to work where Deanna works to have access to these policies that aid in me doing my work better and aid in me having a more productive life as a worker. I personally think these should be the types of policies that organizations adapt at large because they really do benefit workers at large.
Well, just to put some facts on Adia's assertion there, our turnover in 2020 has been lower than our turnover in 2019. And we hear stories of people, women in particularly, and women of color, having to quit to stay home with their children. And our turnover rates have actually been lower than they were last year.
That's great. Dom, did you want to weigh in on this one? I think I saw you nodding your head vigorously.
Yeah, I agree with everything, so I won't repeat anything there. There's no need for me to mansplain. But I think one thing to add, we're trying to help our frontline leaders with some pragmatism. We rolled out something years ago called the Atlassian Team Playbook. It's all of our free resources of how all of our teams across Atlassian work. We've got a whole lot of diversity and inclusion plays in there as well, and exercises. One that we added recently is called the Work-Life Impact Play, and it works on the basis that everyone is having a unique experience of work from home. And I think the mistake we're making, and I've made this mistake, is I just assume everyone's having the same experience as me, but they're not. Everyone's having a very unique experience. So this play helps you understand what is your work from home situation, what's the nature of your role in terms of how much you can do alone versus how much you need a team for, which is a lot harder when you're remote, and what the quality of your network is, both socially and in the work context. And we have that discussion as a group. And it's been an amazing liberator in having conversations of empathy and vulnerability without saying the word empathy or vulnerability, which I find a lot of leaders go and read about and regurgitate, but they don't actually practice. And so that work-life impact play has given our leaders of all shapes and sizes around the organization a chance to connect meaningfully with their peers and their teams on real things. And so we're turning all that sort of thought into action.